Hello, my name is Janice Dent, and this is my contribution to our live class. So, first, I want to say I really enjoyed this topic. Interestingly enough, I started a new position a few weeks ago. So, during training, our trainer asked, which area do you feel is your strong suit? So, skills acquisition or behavior management? And immediately I thought behavior management. um, Obviously, as clinicians, we have to be able to succeed and excel in both skills acquisition and behavior management. But as a clinician, it's also important to recognize your strengths and which areas you are really good at, and that essentially helps to balance out those areas of growth. So I know that as an RBT, I was always working with very aggressive clients. A lot of the clients that I worked with were those clients who were kicked out of the school system or kicked out of other ABA facilities, and they came to us. So once we accepted them, there was really no turning back from there. So most of my experience in ABA is with very severe and challenging behaviors. So I think that that's why it's such a strong area for me. So during this presentation, I really like how you guys, well, the presenters included the discussion questions throughout the presentation, because I think that bringing up those discussion questions throughout the presentation while relevant topics were on the screen were super helpful. One of the questions were, what form of measurement would you use when approaching highly aggressive behaviors? So I think that just depends on the child and the behavior, the previous experience, and just a lot of unknown factors. There's no right or wrong way to measure behaviors. Well, there is a right or wrong way, but there's not one cookie cutter way for every kiddo. So I know for some of our super aggressive kids, we have to do like a dual measurement system. So like, duration and rate. So we're measuring the length of it, but then also how often the behaviors are occurring throughout the session. I think the biggest part about tracking behaviors during very aggressive episodes is understanding like the practicality of tracking those behaviors. So if you have a highly aggressive client and every hit is an instance, like it's very rare that the therapist is going to be tracking each instance of that behavior if it's happening at like say like 30 times an hour, right? Like that's just not practical, especially if it's like in such a brief duration of time, right? So that was a bad example. The 30 an hour is a bad example. But if a kid has an episode, right, and they're hitting, and it lasts like 10 minutes, and within like a 10-minute span, they've hit the therapist like 90 times. In that moment, I'm sure the therapist is implementing those behavior intervention strategies to block and potentially redirect, or in super severe cases, maybe even, restrain or whatever the case is. So it's literally going to be impossible to be tracking the rate or frequency of that behavior. So in that case, as a behavior analyst, you have to think, what is the one method of measurement that's going to be realistic and feasible for the therapist. So in that case, duration might be best because you could just press the timer, intervene, and then when the offset comes, then you can just stop the timer. And usually that's pretty much the case with these long duration, super aggressive clients. But it definitely varies, for each client. There's something else. So another question that was presented was, does the choice really correlate with the learning history of the individual? So the schedule of the reinforcer. I think so. I think the schedule of the reinforcer definitely correlates with the learning history of the individual. And I think that all just goes down to like motivation for some kids. Like longer durations without something makes it more reinforcing, but then some kids, longer durations without it, they just kind of forget about it and just don't really care. So I think that's definitely subjective to the learner. And also like, the intensity and the quality and how often they're getting the reinforcer. These are all things that are impacted by the learning history of the person. So if a kid knows that, hey, with this therapist, if I waited out long enough, they're eventually going to cave, right? Or if this therapist, no matter how much effort I'm putting in, they're still not going to give me what I want. Those things definitely impact like how the child responds and how they behave well, not just the child, but how the individual responds and how they behave as well. So Thank you.